Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out at the range to talk about the M16 AR15. This is America's longest serving infantry rifle, but there's so much misinformation out there about this rifle, starting or going all the way back to its original roots in the 1960s when it was first adopted for the Vietnam War, all the way up till present day. And some of the misinformation that's been circulated, some of the things that have been said about it just simply is not true. Things like it was designed to wound, not kill, all that stuff we want to address in today's video, but also talk about how some people will say, well, the original rifle, like the one you see here, they were just pieces of junk, but they changed all these things, and now that's why it's such a fine rifle. Well, what did they really change? We'll talk about that too. So let's dive into America's rifle and address some of that misinformation and just historical inaccuracies, because this, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the best military rifles the world has ever seen. A lot of folks ask me, how can I get involved in the firearms business in that particular community? And one of the best ways to do that is to become a gunsmith. Every gunsmith I know is just overbooked with work. It's a very good living. And so if you would like to become a gunsmith, you need to go to a gunsmithing school or become an apprentice for an existing gunsmith. But Modern Gun School is an accredited college that also works with veterans in the GI Bill, where you can go and get a degree from accredited college in gunsmithing and then go out and start your own gunsmithing business, which I think is a really great option. Again, throughout my entire life, gunsmiths have always been able to earn a really good living, assuming they have a really strong work ethic. So please check out Modern Gun School. I do have a link in the video description below. The M16 was America's response to innovations that really came about during the Second World War. We all know about the story of the STG-44, the Fedorov, and rifles like that. And the United States saw very clearly, as many nations did, what the direction of small arms was going to be. Before the M16 and the AK and rifles like that, and the STG-44, militaries used what we call full power rifle cartridges. Rifle cartridges like the .308 or the 30-06, the 8mm Mauser. But those rifles generated a lot of recoil. They were heavy. The ammunition was heavy. The weapons that fired them were heavy. And then when you get into modern weapons that load themselves, then you have to deal with the recoil, right, and follow-up shots. And so the military started looking for smaller, what we call intermediate cartridges. Now, the anti-gun media out there just loves to talk about what a Deathray the M16 AR-15 is, and they are two different rifles. The 5.56 cartridge that they're most commonly found in is certainly the same cartridge that the U.S. military and world's militaries would use. It is not a Deathray, folks. The cartridge was literally derived from a varminting cartridge, a cartridge designed to shoot animals smaller than a deer, coyotes, things like that. It was not a Deathray, and certainly nowhere near the same power level as the .308, 30-06, 8mm, and .303 Brit, and all the other cartridges that it will ultimately replace in so many different militaries. The reason they went to such a small cartridge is because they were trying to reduce the burden on the soldier, get rid of some of that weight, reduce the recoil for a select fire rifle like the M16 so you could control it on full automatic. And they didn't feel like they needed to shoot to 2,000 yards. Some of the sights on those old infantry rifles actually had increments out to like 2,000 yards. And we realized, based upon experiences from World War II and Korea and stuff like that, that really combat engagements happened at much closer ranges, so we didn't need all that energy and power. We could get by with something much smaller and lighter. And that's how the M16 came to be, along with so many other rifles of the modern era. So I guess the first myth I want to dispel is that the M16 fires some sort of a death ray, that it destroys meat, is the latest thing that the anti-gun media likes to talk about. No, folks, it doesn't. It's actually a very anemic cartridge, and there's far more powerful cartridges out there, also chambered in self-loading rifles. So the media's hatred of the gun is just purely for politics. All right, so let's take a look at this rifle. This is a very early SP1. This is the AR-15 SP1, so this would be very reminiscent of what like the Air Force would adopt as the 604 rifle and stuff like that. And this gun would ultimately evolve into what we know today as the M4 carbine. But there are some differences between the rifles. So let's talk about the early bad reputation that the gun had gotten because of experiences in Vietnam. What brought that about? So you probably heard the rumors that the gun is wildly unreliable and it got soldiers killed and all this other stuff, and then they blamed the design of the gun itself, saying that, well, it poops where it eats and all this other stuff, and that's the problem with the gun. No, the problems, they're just teething problems. Every new weapon system is going to have teething problems. Doesn't matter if we're talking about the new SIG Spear, doesn't matter if we're talking about an FAL or an AK or an M16. They're all going to have their teething problems, and the gun certainly did. So it was taken right out. And the first reports coming back from Vietnam are actually quite favorable. The troops loved the things. They're lightweight, controllable on full auto, easy to maintain, things like that for the troops that did maintain them. That's another problem we'll talk about. But the gun actually had really good reports in the beginning. But slowly over time, more and more reports are coming in that they're up to 30% failure rates of the firearms. So Colt dispatched all these experts to the field to try to figure out what was going wrong with the M16s. Why were they suddenly having problems? And there's a whole bunch of different factors that they came back to the table with and said, okay, we need to change this, this, and this. Probably the biggest problem with the M16, and this is partly due to Colt's mismanagement of expectations, let's say, the notion got out there, the rumor got out there that the gun was self-cleaning, that it was some space-aged weapon that you never had to clean. Many of the guns weren't even issued with cleaning kits, and that would cause a problem. You're in the jungles of Southeast Asia where it's very wet, very humid, and what do you think is going to happen to metal in that type of environment if you don't maintain it, clean it, take care of it? Well, it's going to corrode and it's going to cause reliability problems, and that's precisely what happened. So you had troops out there that didn't even have cleaning kits, that many of them thought that they didn't have to clean this miracle, space-aged weapon, that it was just self-cleaning and all this other nonsense. That contributed heavily to the notion that the gun was unreliable, and Colt discovered that. So they immediately recommended, hey, issue cleaning kits. But they also learned that they were cutting some corners. They didn't think that they needed to chrome line the chamber. They didn't think they needed to chrome line the bore. And again, when you're dealing with a very hot, humid, moist type environment like Southeast Asia, of course, bare steel is going to rust. And what's going to happen when you get rust in the chamber? Well, when the gun fires, it's going to try to pull that case out of the chamber, because the rust is going to have a rough texture to it. The brass is going to expand into that during the firing process. It's going to grab onto the chamber walls, and when the bolt comes back, it's going to rip the head off the case and cause a hard malfunction that you're not going to easily fix in the field. And that's what was happening with the rifle. So one of the other things that Colt decided to do was, let's just chrome line the chamber and bore of the rifle. They went so far as to chrome bolts and things like that, but later decided we can phosphate that stuff really to keep reliability at optimal performance. We just needed to chrome line the chamber. So that was a big change. Then one of the biggest mess ups is that they went from an extruded powder that the gun was designed to work with to cut corners. They thought, well, we can get to the 3,300 feet per second if we use this ball powder, and we already have a bunch of it in inventory. We'll just burn that up. We can use that. It turns out the ball powder that they were using burned very dirty. Lots of carbon generated from burning that powder, coupled with the system of where it directs gas back into the action to cycle the rifle, the direct gas impingement system or the internal piston system of the gun. That additional carbon was winding up in the gun. Then you had the problem of moisture getting into the carbon. Then you had the problem of the soldiers not cleaning the weapons because they didn't even have cleaning kits, and they thought that the guns were self-cleaning. You get where I'm going. It was just this perfect storm that conspired to give the gun a bad name. Colt quickly identified all these problems. All these problems were very quickly fixed, and the gun went on to earn a really positive reputation. But it takes a long time to get rid of all that negativity. So this rifle, another thing that Colt determined was that because of the different types of powders that were being used and things like that, the gun's cyclic rate on full auto was such that it was also contributing to problems with the gun and premature wear. And so the original AR-15s, M16s have a buffer system like this. Some of you may not have seen it. It's called an Edgewater buffer. It's a very lightweight buffer system, stamped sheet metal here on the end. It doesn't weigh very much at all. It's not like a weighted buffer that you're going to find in a modern M4 carbine or even in an A2 that you would pick up, or most any other modern AR. They just don't use these Edgewater buffers anymore because they're so lightweight. The cyclic rate would go through the roof. These things would sound like Mac 10s when they would fire. And that type of cyclic rate is also going to cause a lot of wear and tear on the weapon. So they put a heavier buffer in the M16A1, and that slowed that cyclic rate down and kept the rifle from battering itself so viciously. So those are the basic changes that were made to the gun. Now, I can take parts out of a modern-day AR-15A2. I can screw the barrel right onto this receiver. I can take this Edgewater system out, throw it out, put a modern buffer system and spring in this gun. They didn't change anything really in terms of the dimensions and the overall function of the gun. They just changed various components to improve them, like chroming the barrel and changing the buffer system itself. So let's take a look. Let's just take a look at one of these things, too. It's kind of interesting. So this is an early bolt and carrier, and you'll notice it doesn't have the serrations on it because the original rifle didn't have a forward assist. The Army would request that in a later update, the M16A1. And so that's really cool. And then something I have here is a replica. This is an early, what we call waffle magazine. This is a replica. This is made by Brownells, but it looks very similar to the original 20-round magazines that would have been used in rifles like that, which is why I keep it in here. So later, obviously, the serrations would come about, stuff like that. But again, I can take this bolt and carrier and drop it right into an A4 and fire the gun, and it'll work just fine, even though, you know, it's slightly different. So my point in pointing that out is that major changes were not made to this gun, completely redesigning it, making it from, you know, turning it from a piece of junk that was unreliable into Vietnam to what we have today with the M4 rifle that people generally like. There weren't massive changes to the gun's overall design. Now there's a bunch of wives' tales that are really kind of interesting, and a few of them I want to point out in this video to talk about information that people just kind of keep regurgitating online. A lot of folks have figured out that this is all nonsense, but some folks out there still believe this stuff. So we'll address some of that. Then I want to show you some of the changes in later rifles. I already showed you what this one looks like on the inside. I'll show you a more modern rifle and what some of those changes look like in terms of internal changes. So let's jump into some of the wives' tales that popped up into my mind today when we started filming. But I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of them. So if you guys think of some of the old wives' tales, you know, falsehoods that have been repeated over and over again about the M16 and the AR15 over the years, comment down below, because if there's enough of them that we've overlooked in this video, we'll make another video and address those as well. So one of my favorite things, and this came out of the generation preceding me, the generation that actually fought in the Vietnam War. There's so many people out there that either are veterans or claim to be veterans that would say things like, well, my M16 was a piece of junk. Matter of fact, it said it was made by Mattel, a toy company. And you'll hear that over and over. When I was a young man, you heard that all the time. And probably half of the gun buying public believed that nonsense, that Mattel made the M16, was literally made by a toy company, which is why it was a cheap piece of junk and why it failed so miserably in Vietnam. Of course, that's not true. During the Vietnam War, there were 3 manufacturers of the M16, and Mattel was not one of them. You had Colt, the primary manufacturer, but when we get into war, many times gun manufacturers can't meet the demand of the government, so the government will then take that licensing and give it to other companies to help augment the flow of weapons into the government coffers so they can fight the war. So there were a couple of other companies that were contracted to make rifles in small numbers. And one of the most common ones would be H&R, Harrington and Richardson, right? So they did make M16s, and you will find them out there. Those were used in Vietnam. A lesser known one is the GM Hydromatic. So GM actually did make a few rifles as well. But let me stress again, Mattel didn't make the guns. They didn't make any of the guns or any of the parts that I'm aware of for the guns. So please don't repeat that old wives' tale. One of my other favorite ones, and this is ones I've gone back and forth on, this one's still pretty prevalent, that the M16 was designed to wound and not kill. The logic being that if you shot one Russian soldier during the Cold War, or one commie, that they would all of a sudden go to their wounded comrade that wasn't killed because it wasn't designed to kill them, and then 3 of them would carry him off the battlefield, or 2 would carry him off the battlefield, taking 3 people off the battlefield. That was the logic that these people were trying to apply to this false statement. If you know anything about Soviet doctrine, about World War II, or just the Soviets in general, they don't care about human life. You're a commodity to them. So no, a Soviet soldier, the whole platoon isn't going to rush to save the one guy and stop fighting all of a sudden. That wasn't even something that our military thought about. On top of that, people that insist on parroting this nonsense, I've said, okay, look, let's not argue about it. I can't prove to you that it wasn't designed to wound. What I have to ask you, if this is what you're going to stick with, your story, prove to me, just give me one government document, one requirement document, anything from the Department of Defense or the U.S. Army or any branch of the military that said, hey, oh, and by the way, let's make this thing wound people and not kill them. You're not going to find it. I can't prove a negative, but if you want to continue to perpetuate this lie, then the burden of proof falls on you. Show me that document. And if you're watching this and you truly believe this gun was designed to wound and not kill, then put a link in your comment showing me that government document that called out for that stipulation. You're not going to be able to do it because it doesn't exist, but go ahead if you feel like you can. All right, so one of the other things was people will say that the gun was designed for the bullet to tumble. It was purposely designed to make the bullet unstable so it would tumble through the body. Some people would say it would tumble so violently that the bullet would explode. It wouldn't even cause an exit wound. It was designed to bounce around like a pinball inside and all this other nonsense. So when the U.S. military first fielded the gun, yeah, due to poor bullet design and the incorrect twist rate, they were having accuracy issues, and they were having bullets ripping apart when they yawed, because all bullets are going to yaw when they go through soft tissue, and they were ripping apart. But that was poor bullet construction, poor design, the wrong rifling that was chosen for the rifle of the time. Keep in mind, the M16 was based on the 222 Remington cartridge, the varminting cartridge, and that shot lighter weight bullets, like 40 grain bullets or so. With a lighter weight bullet, you want a slower twist rate. Why? Because the faster you try to spin that bullet, the more stress you put on that bullet, and you can rip the jacket off of it or compromise the integrity of the jacket. Therefore, when the bullet hits something, the bullet's already, the integrity's been compromised, it's just going to fall apart. And so they were trying to strike that balance. Well, we went with a 55 grain bullet for the 223 cartridge that wound up being used in the M16, so they went for the 1 in 14 twist of the 222. Wasn't working out for them, wasn't giving them the accuracy they wanted, and so they redesigned the rifles to have a later 1 in 12 twist rate, which worked just fine with the 55 grain bullets. But later, the U.S. military would look at tracer rounds and also the SS-109, which became the M855 ball round, which was a 62 grain bullet, a heavier bullet. And so the U.S. military said, well, give us a 1 in 9 twist rate. And the U.S. Marines went with the 1 in 7 for some reason in the M16A2. So the M16 ultimately would evolve into a 1 in 7 twist rate to work with the SS-109 with the 62 grain, and now we use 77 grain bullets and stuff like that in the U.S. military as well. So that faster twist rate, the heavier a bullet gets, the faster the twist rate to properly stabilize that bullet is required. So we went from lightweight bullets and slow twist rates to heavier bullets and faster twist rates, and it really had nothing to do with the gun being designed to wound or it purposely being designed to cause bullets to fragment and things like that. The U.S. military actually tried to stop that to the point where some soldiers will tell you, well, the bullets just zip right through and don't do any damage at all. And I don't think that's always necessarily true, but bullets do crazy things. But I just wanted to address that. So, all right, talking with my hands today, folks. Let's see, I have something else. I just have some notes here. So the other thing is, I think I talked about this, the self-cleaning. No. Now, I actually found a picture of a tag, and I'll show it to you guys. Somebody posted on the internet, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But a tag, I've never seen one in person, that was hanging from an early SP1, like the rifle I showed you at the beginning of the video, that literally says, Colt, these rifles sell for $189. Oh, and one of its features is it's self-cleaning. So maybe Colt did perpetuate that lie, and now it's on them if they did. But I'll show you that picture and see what you guys think, if it's true or not. The gun's unreliable, just wildly unreliable. Well, that's not true. And direct gas impingement doesn't make the gun unreliable. Matter of fact, direct gas impingement is one of the reasons why the gun is so incredibly reliable, so incredibly soft shooting, and so controllable on full automatic. Its gas system is unique. Now, other countries have since adopted the M16, some with DI and some with gas pistons like the 416. Me, I'm a die-hard DI guy. You couldn't give me a piston gun to replace my DI gun. Now, I do have piston guns, but what I'm saying is I will always go with DI first because I understand the benefits of it, and I know all too well from shooting them extensively that's a softer, easier shooting gun. It's just a better gas system. So the gun poops where it eats. Well, if you use the proper powder, carbon isn't really an issue. Dry carbon is actually a lubricant, and the powder that comes back down the gas tube goes into the ejection port, and excess gases are vented right here through these holes. Now, yes, some carbon gets into the action, things like that, but if you shot rifles, self-loading rifles of any type ever in your entire life, and you've actually cleaned them, you're going to find that other guns like the HK series, roller delay guns, are infinitely dirtier from all the gas blowing back around the cartridge through the rifling flutes. But even then, if you don't even have direct gas impingement and you don't have flutes in the chamber, guns still get dirty on the inside. Carbon will find its way into all areas of a gun regardless of its operating system. So using the proper powder along with the DI system, the gun is perfectly reliable, and again, I absolutely prefer it. Now, one of the things, this is something I remember as a kid that is absolutely false, but the anti-gunners can glob onto this and try to beat us over the head with it. People have said that, well, the AR-15 is so easily converted to a machine gun that all you have to do is just file on the firing pin a certain way and it becomes a machine gun. No, that's a complete lie. You file on that firing pin at all you're going to do is keep the gun from firing. You're not going to make it into a machine gun. That's not how any of this works, okay? And I'm not going to tell you how to make a machine gun, but what I am going to tell you is filing on a firing pin isn't going to accomplish anything other than making you buy another firing pin because you're an idiot and filed on your firing pin. All right, that's the end of that segment. Here in front of me, I have an FN manufactured collector's series rifle, which is a replica of the United States Marine Corps M16A4. And so this would be kind of the last evolutionary step of the 20-inch barreled fighting rifle that the U.S. military would employ. We've since moved on to the M4. All branches are now using the M4, which is the carbine with the 14.5-inch barrel, things like that. Collapsible stock and all the other features that you would attribute to the M4. But if you take a look at this rifle and compare it to the gun we opened up the video with, you're going to find that there are some changes, but as I had previously mentioned, these parts are interchangeable. So if you take a look at the A4, one of the things that came about with the M16A1 was the forward assist. This is something the military wanted, and that's why you have the serrations on the bolt carrier. That's what this engages with to force it to go closed. This rifle has about an inch longer stock than the earlier rifles. So these had shorter stocks on them. This would be lengthened a little bit because Americans are generally, average height of an American male is around 6 foot. So we wanted a slightly longer stock, although most militaries do like shorter stocks for use with body armor and stuff. That's why the M4 is so popular now, because when this rifle, the M16A2, came into service, flak jackets were in use, but big, thick plate carriers really weren't. Now that our troops are carrying, real body armor, not just flak jackets, having that shorter stock actually works. So that's why the M4 has that adjustable stock. It really works nicely with the way we kit our soldiers, modern soldiers, out. But if you take a look at early rifles like this one, they didn't have a cleaning kit in the buttstock. There's no trap door back here. And that would come about with the M16A1. Here on this A4, we can see that it has the trapdoor back here. Now, I also should mention that in the late 80s, I think it was, FN started manufacturing M16s, and then today they're the primary supplier to the U.S. military for M16s, so that would be your fourth manufacturer that the U.S. military has used to go with the other three that I mentioned previously in the video. This is the current generation of rifles manufactured by FN. So I can go into all the other stuff. Slightly heavier barrel. The early guns had pencil weight barrels. The M16A2 brought out a heavier profile barrel, would have a thin pencil barrel profile here, but they beefed it up out here to add some additional weight. These are changes primarily the Marine Corps asked for that would also roll over into the Army later when they adopted the M16A2. And then the M16A2 had a carrying handle built into the front on the top of the receiver like the A1, but it had combat adjustable sights that didn't require tools to make adjustments. And then that would go away to the flat top that we see here. That makes it the A4, and then also this flat top is what we use on the current M4. But if we take a look at the inside of this gun, just go ahead and open her up here, take the magazine out. She is empty. We already checked before we started filming. I'm going to go ahead and pop this top pin. I showed you the Edgewater buffer in the SP1 earlier. This is an example of what the current buffer looks like. This thing has some weight to it. It's a weighted buffer. And again, this was designed to slow the cyclic rate down of the M16, which was full auto. Here's the T-handle, the bolt and carrier out of the FN, A4. If I come over here to this SP1, very early 1960s era rifle, well, I can't pin this one on because this has one of the things that the early Colts did was they had these pins, these huge pins in the front. They didn't have the takedown pin. It was to keep you from pinning M16 uppers to AR15 lowers. And so this is not compatible with that simply because this is a civilian modification that was done. But what I can show you is that the trigger systems are exactly the same. And I can swap out the internal components. Get out of there. So there's that Edgewater buffer that I talked about earlier. All right, old and new. And then I can take my bolt and carrier out of the SP1, take the T-handle out of the FN, take the bolt and carrier out of the FN, put that in there, take the buffer tube out of the FN, or the buffer spring, I should say. Buffer tube's in the rifle. Get in there, would you? And the gun will work just fine. Cycle, everything. So the reason I showed you that is because really not that much has changed with the guns. Some cosmetic appearances, some slight modifications, like with the chrome lining, the forward assist, trapdoor in the buttstock, slightly lengthened buttstock, slightly heavier barrel, flat top uppers. Pretty much cosmetic type changes over the years, but it's the same darn rifle that we've had in the U.S. inventory for, gosh, man, it's over 60 years. I bet you the sucker's going to make it to 70, 80 years before it gets replaced by something else. It may even go longer than that. Who knows? Can you imagine that? A rifle in service for 50 plus years. That's just crazy. But that's a testament to how amazing this rifle is. Guys, if you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel, the best way to do that is become part of our Patreon family. There's a link in the video description below. Also, right here on YouTube, you got the thanks and the join button right underneath the video player you're watching right now. You can mash either one of those buttons and help support us in the age of demonetization right here on YouTube. Please swing by and check out Copper Custom. Thank you for 16 years of support. We'll talk to you guys soon.